Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel. Today I have yet another spawn guide for you, and this time it's on control. This is my first control spawn guide I've done on this game, and today we're covering Vault. What will follow will be a rewind spawn guide and then protocol spawn guide, so as long as they stay in the rotation for ranked play. I know they added rewind in as a third one simply for ranked play, it's not in the CDL rotation, so fingers crossed it does stay in, because personally I prefer rewind control out of the other two control maps. If you want any hardpoint spawn guides, if you want to know how to manipulate spawns properly and how to block spawns properly on hardpoint, you can check out the playlist down below or my recent videos which have every single one of the ranked play maps in a hardpoint spawn guide. So without further ado, let's crack on to control. So control itself is relatively easy to understand because they're fairly logical and the spawns never flip. The only thing that tends to happen is an alternative spawn on the same side of the map is used. So let's take this side here. So the three, we're going to start from on these offense spawns. Okay, so these are the side that the offense team will spawn on. Now, the three offense spawns areas are back trophy, back tank, and P2, and the main default spawn is back tank, and this will be the spawn the game uses unless the defense team pushes up, which we'll get onto in a second. Now, if someone pushes up into the yellow zone, the players on the opposite team will spawn yellow, okay? And if someone pushes up into the blue zone, the players on the enemy team or the other team will spawn black back trophy, okay? So being in this area will spawn the enemies here. Being in this area will spawn the enemies over here, okay? It's fairly logical and so hopefully quite easy to remember. Now, if a team has players in both red zones, so if there's players pushed up on this left side and on this right side here, the enemies will actually spawn red. Now, note that if one of the two players in the red area dies, it will spawn the enemies in the opposite side to the player that's still blocking red. So let's say, for example, if the player, you've got a player blocking this side and the player in this red zone here, but let's say, for example, if the player poolside over here where my little cursor is, let's say they die, and then what will happen is the person stays alive trophy. The enemies will then start to spawn P2 because this player's died, opening up the spawn as the safest spawn for them to be. So be very careful as well when you're pushing fully up when the enemies are spawning tanks. So let's say you get into this position. What is very important is that you don't then block this spawn, which you can do by looking at it directly or being pushed even further out into the enemy spawn. Because what happens, the game will select a random point outside of this map, probably more towards the middle of the map here to spawn the enemy. So you really want that to not happen. So once you get the enemy spawning back tank, which is an ideal situation, you don't want to push too much. Just watch the lanes coming off of that spawn and you should be gravy. Now, a solid setup example can look like this. So I know it probably is a little hard to see, but there's 4 red arrows. You've got one back trophy, one here on the burnt car, one just overlooking the pool heady, and then one back P2. And this is a real nice area, a real nice setup, because you can have these players are blocking the blue and yellow spawn, meaning that the enemies are spawning tank, and then they've got every single push out of the tank spawn. If they go here, they're stuck. If they go here, they're stuck. If they go left or right, they're stuck. But that's generally a sort of setup you want to have. And this will keep the enemy spawning the furthest from either objective, okay? Now, let's say the offense team manages to capture A, and now they only have B to capture. Now, spawning the enemy P2 is probably actually the best way to keep them from spawning that far out from B. Tank, if they spawn tank, sometimes they have a little bit of an easier route to get around the back. But if B is the only objective you want them to, or they're left to get, you really want them spawning back here. And a nice example of that is having players pushed up the left-hand side enough to block this back left spawn and to be in this yellow zone, but then have these two players on the other side of the map pulled a little bit further back than they would to spawn the enemy tank, and that will essentially mean they spawn back P2. Then they're pretty much trapped, okay? Be very careful though, as soon as you push slightly up to this player, so imagine this player catwalk pushes down to the bottom catwalk, that's close enough to this spawn to spawn them tank. So just be very careful if that happens, and it's nice to have communication within the team in this sort of setup, because this player here will directly see if they're spawning here rather than here, and that will tell you if these two players are pushed too far close to this P2 spawn. Now let's look at some scenarios and let's take the offense right now. So let's assume we're spawning at these spawn points here. Now, if you spawn red and the enemy team aren't pushed up, there's no need to panic. That is simply your default spawn. Now, if you spawn red and you know a player is in the blue zone, an enemy, is in the blue zone or the yellow zone, it definitely means a player is also in the other zone. Okay, so if you spawn here and you know an enemy's trophy, you've definitely also got an enemy P2, because otherwise you'd just spawn P2, for example, okay? Now, if you spawn P2, it essentially means there's an enemy pushed up trophy, and if you spawn trophy, it essentially means there's an enemy pushed up P2. It's fairly self-explanatory. Now, if you're the team, I've added this little line here if you can't tell. If your team has full control of the map and are pushed up to this divisive line around the B area and this sort of line across the map, and the enemy team is all behind this line, so you've pushed up to this line, the enemy team are all back here coming off spawn, you can actually sometimes spawn here because of simply how close the enemies are, how pushed back the enemies are, and how close your team is to this B objective. So if you ever spawn in if you ever spawn in blue, and you notice that your team has got full B control, chances are that's why you spawn blue, not because an enemy is P2, okay? Now, on the flip side of this, let's take it from the other perspective. The 4 spawn areas on the defense spawn side are art, back art, or in the garden, sort of behind the art building, garden, like mid-garden we're going to call that, and then back scaffold, or scaffold side of garden. But these 4 areas are where you'll see the main spawns happen. The default spawn out of all of these 4 is this red spawn here, okay? This spawn is the default spawn, which means that you will likely spawn here 90% of the time until the enemies push up and sort of try and manipulate them a little bit. Now, if someone on the offense team manages to get into the blue area here, that will then spawn the defense team at mid-garden. So if an enemy is here, or if someone is here on this offense from this side, players on defense will spawn here, okay? Easy peasy. If the team manages to get into art, the defense team will actually spawn all the way back here. Okay, so self-explanatory. It's fairly easy to understand. You can see it's fairly logical. They're just trying to spawn their team at the furthest possible point away from where the other team is pushed up to. Quite easy. Now, if the offense team are all, so when I say offense team, it's the team coming from this right-hand side. If every single player on the offense team are pushed back further than this yellow line, so let's say they're all over here in this general zone, this can open up this yellow spawn in bottom art, and that opens up for the defense teams. So yeah, that tells you that essentially if you spawn there, that essentially tells you that the enemy team are pushed no further forward than this yellow line. Going with that scenario situation, if you spawn red, as I say, it doesn't mean too much other than the fact that that's your normal spawn. So if you spawn red, don't read too much into it. Now, if you spawn art or yellow, as I say, that means the enemy are pushed all the way back into their spawn and they're not pushed forward over this yellow line. Okay, so they're fairly stuck in their spawn. So the game has rewarded that map control by spawning you a little bit closer out of the map, sorry. Out of the spawn. God. Now, if you find yourself spawning mid-garden in this blue zone, that tells you an enemy has pushed up past B, but not quite into bottom art, okay? So they're pushed up this right-hand side here, maybe on this Jeep, maybe just outside this door, but they're pushed up through B, and as a result, you can't spawn red anymore, you're spawning here. Now, if you spawn pink, back scaffold, that tells you that this player is not only pushed past B, but they now reside in the art building themselves. So they're probably maybe got a sub, maybe got an AR, but they're in this building, and as a result, you spawned all the way over here, okay? So knowing that enables you to know where at least one person on the enemy team is. You can communicate that to the rest of your team, and hopefully it means you can, I guess it will make you look like you're cheating because you're going to know exactly where they're going to be when you come off of the spawn, okay? Now, strategy-wise, I'm going to take the offense role here. So let's say you are spawning on this right-hand side here. Generally, at any point in this game, at any point on the round when you are on offense, it's great to have someone push through R or P4, so whether they're this building or this building, and keeping the enemies in their spawn. Okay, the enemies won't spawn out unless you're blocking every single one of these spawn points, which you're not going to do if there's only one of you and you're blocking one side. Okay, so if say for example you had someone here, the enemies are all going to spawn here, meaning they're going to run out of middle, they're going to run out through R, and you're just going to get an easy line of sight of them running across the map. Okay. Now, if you can get a couple of people to do this sort of situation, let's say you can have a couple of people in P4, one watching the back door maybe, and one watching the front, they're pretty much stuck in that spawn, okay? They'll be stuck back here, meaning that it's really easy. And what that then means is that the rest of your team can hop on A, they can slow capture A while you're running their lives down, and it means you're more likely to win the round. You're going to win on caps, and you're going to win on lives by the time it gets to round 5, guaranteeing you that defense spawn. Now, I'd say when B is the only objective, obviously, you don't want that setup I've just explained because the enemies are going to spawn in here, which is relatively close to B, when in fact you could have them spawning here, which is what I'm going to try and get through to you in a moment. So when B is the only hill left to capture for your team, as I say, you want the defense team to be spawning all the way back here, which is the furthest possible spawn point from the current objective, the objective you're trying to capture. As a result, you pretty much want the same setup I've just described, but the other way around. You want a couple players residing in art, so they can be top or bottom art. It really doesn't matter. And from there, they can trap the enemy into this spawn, okay? You can then have a couple of people capturing B, but you're going to know if there's someone, if you've got teammates in art, they're going to be spawning back left. So you can have someone maybe in square here watching the window. You can have someone maybe top back lion watching the push through the middle, so they're going to spawn here. As long as you've got their push round to the other side of the garden, round to the front, you can capture B without a worry, okay? And that is as simple as that. And that's control spawns on Vault. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a nice quick one compared to our hardpoint ones, and I hope it was clear enough. If you have any questions, you can either comment down below, you can go into my Discord and DM me on Discord, or you can tweet me down using the links below in the description. Enjoy the rest of your day. Ciao for now.